You perceive the sting of that memory even before the words land, the echo of a voice that never asked, only demanded, the weight of a presence that drained, pulled, pressed against your chest until breathing felt like a crime. You perceive again the silence you swallowed, the nights you rehearsed strength in the mirror. You perceive the shaking in your hands that you disguised as calm. He wanted to test you, push you to the edge, measure how much you could take before you shattered, but he miscalculated. He never perceived that your silence was not weakness, your waiting was not surrender, your endurance was not his victory. You stood there, bleeding inside, but you did not collapse. You felt every cut, every doubt, every dismissal. You felt the sharpness of his game sink deeper than skin. Still you stood, still you breathed, still you carried the unbearable, and he mistook that for control. He believed he owned your time, your reactions, your patience, but the truth was darker. The longer he tested you, the more fragile he became, because every trial he threw at you, you absorbed. Every storm he built, you walked through. Every wall he raised, you perceived as paper. There was a night you thought it would end you, a night when your body shook, when your own heartbeat felt like an enemy. You stared at the ceiling, whispering words you never spoke aloud. You asked why you deserved this test, why your loyalty was used as a weapon, why your patience was mistaken for a cage. He wanted to see you break. He wanted to watch your collapse, but you never gave him that performance. Instead, you perceived the cracks in him, the nervous gestures, the hollow justifications, the trembling in his laughter when you refused to bend. It was not your patience that shattered. It was his illusion of power. He thought himself the master of endurance, the ruler of time. But as days bled into months, as months bled into years, it was him who grew smaller, him who grew brittle, him who collapsed beneath the weight of his own test. You perceive now how that breaking began slowly. Tiny fractures behind his eyes, moments when his voice faltered, spaces between his words where fear leaked through. He thought you didn't notice, but you did. You always did. And though you were drowning in your own quiet pain, you still perceived his unraveling. The man who once seemed unshakable became transparent. The mask he wore began to slip. The control he clung to dissolved in his trembling hands. He wanted to test your patience, but what he truly tested was his own reflection. Every time he tried to bend you, he bent himself. Every time he tried to silence you, he silenced parts of his soul. Every time he tried to break you, he split his own foundation. You perceive it now as prophecy fulfilled. What was meant to destroy you became the mirror of his destruction. What was meant to measure your weakness exposed his own. He broke himself against the wall of your endurance, and even in your pain, you never shattered. You lived inside the fire, you carried the scars, you breathed the smoke, but you walked out, and he remained trapped inside the burning house he built. Have you ever perceived that reversal in your life? When the one who pressed your wounds ended up bleeding from their own cuts? When the one who thought they controlled your breaking collapsed before your eyes? You already know that taste. You already know that shift. You held on to your patience as if it was the last fragile thread. You believed it was weakness. You believed it was silence. But patience became the blade he never saw. Patience became the mirror that showed him his own ruin. Patience became the stone that broke his own hand when he tried to throw it at you. You perceive now that endurance is not passive. Endurance is violent in silence. Endurance is rebellion disguised as waiting. Endurance is the storm that looks like still water until it swallows the shore. He never understood that. He thought patience meant surrender. He thought quiet meant loss. He thought waiting meant obedience, but you know better. Because you lived it, you carried it, you perceived the truth of it. He wanted to test your patience, but ended up breaking himself. That is not just a sentence, that is the entire story of your survival. That is the hidden prophecy you walked through. That is the reason you're breathing now with a chest that still aches but refuses to collapse. You may still carry the sound of his voice, the words that pierced, the laughter that mocked, the silence that weighed like iron. But those echoes no longer define you. They only remind you that you endured, and he did not. You perceive it clearer now. Every shadow you walked through taught you strength he never had. Every silence you endured carved depth he never touched. Every scar you carry reflects his breaking, not yours. You are not the one who failed the test. He is. You are not the one who shattered. He is. You are not the one who lost patience. He is. And the most haunting part, he cannot rebuild. because what he broke was not just you, it was himself. And while you can rise from ashes, he is still choking on the smoke of his own fire. You perceive now that patience was never about waiting for him to change. Patience was about holding yourself steady until the truth revealed itself, and it did. It always does. Truth always exposes the one who hides behind games. He wanted to test your patience, but in the end, he confessed his own weakness without words. And you survived, and you perceive that survival in your bones every single day. You already know this, don't you? You already felt it. But hearing it again pierces differently, because sometimes the truth must be repeated until your body finally accepts it, until your scars recognize themselves as proof, not punishment. So, let me tell you once more. He wanted to test your patience, but he ended up breaking himself, and you are still here, still breathing, still perceiving, still stronger than the silence that tried to erase you. If this pierced you, if it reopened the scar just to remind you it's healed, write it in the comments. I needed to hear this, because you did. And that confession is part of the freedom he never tasted. This is not the end. This is only the first unveiling. The next chapter will open the side of the story he never wanted you to perceive, and once you see it, you will never look at patience the same again. This conversation does not end here. Come with me to the next video. You thought it was over. You thought the breaking belonged to the past. But memory does not ask for permission. It seeps in like smoke through closed doors. You perceive it now. That sting in your chest. Not from today, not from yesterday, but from the wound that pretends to sleep. You believed you buried it. But pain has its own resurrection. It rises when you least expect. It whispers when the room is silent. It burns when you touch joy with trembling hands. You perceive the fire in places you swore were healed. He wanted to test your patience. But patience turned into chains in your own mind. Even after he broke, even after the mask fell, you still feel the echo of waiting. The endless waiting. The hours that were stolen. The years that cannot return. You perceive the theft, even in your victories. There are nights you sit in quiet triumph, but his shadow still sits across from you. Not alive, not present, but heavy. Because breaking him did not erase the breaking inside you. And that is the truth you never wanted to face. You carry scars like weapons, but scars also whisper. They whisper of the moments you almost collapsed. They whisper of the doubts you swallowed like poison. They whisper of the weakness you never showed but always perceived. And when you close your eyes, you are back there. Back in that room. Back in that silence. Back with the question burning. Will this be the moment I finally break? You didn't. You never did. But the fear of breaking left a mark deeper than the test itself. And that fear follows you. It walks beside you even now. It lives in the corners of your victories. It sleeps in the softness of your laughter. It wakes when trust feels too close. Because he wanted to test your patience. But the test did not end when he shattered. The test lives on in your body, in your memory, in your pulse. You perceive it when your hands shake without reason. You perceive it when silence feels louder than any scream. You perceive it when you push people away before they can get too close. He is gone, but the test remains. And that is the cruelty no one warned you about. You broke free, but pieces of him still cling to you, like glass in the skin, like smoke in the lungs, like shadows that crawl long after the sun has risen. Have you ever perceived that? How freedom can still feel like a prison, how victory can still taste like ash, how surviving can still feel like carrying the battlefield inside your chest. You are not crazy for feeling this. You are not weak for still trembling. You are not lost for still hearing echoes of a voice you escaped. This is the truth of wounds. They do not vanish. They transform. They evolve. They return in silence to test you again. And here is the haunting prophecy. This time it is not him testing you. This time it is life itself. This time it is the memory asking, will you break now that he's gone? Or will you finally perceive that the breaking was never yours? You already sense it. You already know that the patience you carried was not wasted. But knowing does not silence the ache. Because sometimes healing feels too much like bleeding again. Sometimes release feels too much like drowning. Sometimes rising feels too much like falling. You perceive the paradox inside you. You survived him, but you are still surviving yourself. You conquered the storm, but the storm left rain in your bones. You silenced his power, but echoes of his games still whisper in your nights. And maybe this is the real test, not the one he designed, not the one he thought he controlled, but the test of carrying your own shadow without collapsing beneath it, the test of perceiving that scars are not curses, but maps, maps that lead you into depth, into truth, into the place where your soul refuses to die. Do you feel it? The trembling that comes when you realize the breaking was never final, that every day you wake up you are still inside a continuation of that test, not because of him anymore, but because of the way your heart still fights to trust, because of the way your body still prepares for war, even in peace. He broke himself, yes, but the debris still litters your path, and every step you take cuts your feet. You bleed again. You perceive the sting again, and yet you keep walking. That is the part no one speaks of, that healing is not clean. It is messy. It is slow. It drags you back through the dirt of your past until you see yourself clearly. And you are seeing yourself now, perceiving yourself now. The patience that once felt like chains is now your fire. The silence that once suffocated you is now your prophecy. The waiting that once drained you is now the evidence of your unbreakable core. But still, you ache. Still you remember. Still you carry, because the wound is not erased, it is transformed. And transformation is not painless. It never was. Have you ever woken up from sleep with tears on your face, not knowing why? Have you ever laughed in daylight, only to feel the echo of grief pull at your chest? Have you ever touched joy and immediately feared it would be stolen? That is the wound speaking. That is the shadow breathing. That is the memory testing you again. But listen closely. The test has already been answered. You passed when you did not shatter. You passed when you carried silence like a weapon. You passed when his breaking became louder than yours. You passed when you perceived that the fire did not consume you. So why does it still hurt? Because endurance leaves residue. Because survival has a cost. Because being unbroken does not mean being untouched. You are not untouched. You are marked. You are scarred. You are stitched together by patience and fire. And that is why you are terrifying. Because what he tried to break still breathes, and what he broke in himself cannot rise again. He wanted to test your patience. But the test is over. Now the question remains, will you perceive yourself as broken or as proof? Will you perceive your scars as shame or as prophecy? Will you perceive your trembling as weakness or as the rhythm of survival? The choice is already written, you know it, you feel it, but sometimes you need to hear it out loud. You did not break. You will not break. You cannot break. Because the breaking was never yours, it was always his. And every time you remember, every time you ache, every time you relive the wound, that is not weakness. That is testimony. That is the sound of a soul that refused to collapse. If this pierced you, if this dragged you back into the shadow just to remind you that you walked out, then comment a black heart right now. Because scars recognize each other. Because survivors perceive each other. And this is not the end. This is only the second unveiling. The next revelation will cut deeper. The next vision will expose the truth you never allowed yourself to touch. And once it opens, you will never see your scars the same again. This conversation is still burning. Follow me into the next fire. He wanted to test your patience, but ended up breaking himself. And now you perceive it fully. The breaking was never yours. Every silence you carried, every scar you hid, every night you begged for release, none of it destroyed you. It carved you. It shaped you. It revealed the fire no hand could extinguish. You thought you were waiting, but patience became your rebellion. You thought you were weak, but endurance turned into prophecy. You thought you were breaking, but the collapse was always his. You perceive it now. Scars shining like truth, silence roaring like thunder, patience burning like a blade in your hand. What was once your prison has become your crown. What was once your shame has become your proof. He is gone. His voice may still echo, his shadow may still linger, but you know the truth, he was never the storm. You were, and he drowned in the waters he thought would swallow you. You rise now, not because you are untouched, but because you are unbroken. You rise with trembling hands that hold fire. You rise with scars that prophesy survival. You rise with silence that shakes the ground louder than screams. This is your turning. This is your unveiling. This is the prophecy fulfilled. You endured what was meant to end you, and it became the reason you will never bow again. You perceive it now in every breath. The breaking is his story. The becoming is yours. If these words pierced you, if you felt your scars burning like truth again, Don't let it stay hidden. Subscribe now, because the next video will take you deeper than this fire. Comment the phrase that cut you the most, bleed it into words, and share this with the one who still believes they are broken. This is not the end. It is only the unveiling.